And now on Rough Diamond Radio, Part 9 of Hengist's Inheritance.
Chapter 48. Doris sat behind her desk, typing a letter pertaining to a lease on a pig farm, when Shelby arrived late back as usual from a meeting. Without a word, he walked to his office. As he closed the door, he shouted, "Doris, coffee." Doris muttered under her breath a heartfelt, "It's nearly home time, so you can go fuck yourself." Then the phone on her desk rang. "Good afternoon, Smithfield and Company solicitors. How can I help?" "Hello, Doris, how are you?" "Mr. Henderson? How are you? We've missed you here." "I'm very well, thank you, Doris. Just thought I'd call to tell you I'll be back in work this coming Monday." "That's great news, I must say. The operation went well, I take it." "Yes, it did, thank you for asking. I'm still a bit sore when I sit down, but that's only to be expected, I suppose." "Indeed, Mr. Henderson. One thing before I go, Doris." "Yes, Mr. Henderson? Is everything all right there?" "Yes, why do you ask?" "It's just I had a call at home, asking if they could apply for the vacancy there at the office." "This office?" "Yes, but the strange thing was when I said that there was no vacancy, the person on the phone said he was sorry he'd made a mistake. The vacancy doesn't become available until tomorrow." Then hung up. "That's very strange, Mr. Henderson. Probably some silly bugger playing games." "Well, as long as you're not handing in your notice, young lady. Smithfield and Company solicitors couldn't manage without you, Doris." "Nice of you to say so, Mr. Henderson. Would you like to speak to Mr. Shelby?" "God, no, thank you, Doris. I'll save the pleasure until Monday." "Oh yes. I think it's about time we had a chat about giving you a rise. How does an extra, say, 10 shillings a week sound to you?" "That sounds lovely, sir. That would be very much welcomed." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson." At that moment the door to the street opened and 2 men walked in. "Sorry, Mr. Henderson. Someone has come into the office, so I'll better go." "I understand, Doris. I look forward to seeing you Monday. Bye for now." "Yes, bye, Mr. Henderson, and thank you again." Doris put the phone down and looked up at the 2 men. "How can I help you, gentlemen?" The larger of the 2 stepped forward. "I'm Mr. Joshua, this is Mr. Tree. Shelby's office," he pointed to Shelby's door. "Yes, who shall I say?" "That will not be necessary." Both men walked over, opened the door without knocking, and entered, closing the door behind them. There was silence for about a minute, then an almighty scream, and the sound of tables being overturned. The office door then flew open, and Shelby exited at great speed, screaming at the top of his voice. He ran through the office through the front door, and still screaming on up the street. Mr. Joshua and Mr. Tree walked out of what had been Shelby's office, totally unflustered, on through the office to the street. Mr. Joshua paused in the doorway. "Mr. Shelby has just tendered his resignation." He then followed Mr. Tree out and up the street after Shelby. Shelby, in total panic, reached his car, fumbling with the keys. Finally it opened and he got in, started the engine, and raced off. Mr. Joshua and Mr. Tree unhurriedly got into a big black expensive-looking car and sped off after him. Back in the office, Doris smiled. It looked like Mr. Shelby had left the employ of Smithfield & Co. This, coupled with Mr. Henderson back at work on Monday and a 10-shilling pay rise. She decided to nip out and get some cream cakes to celebrate. As she walked to the baker's, an old lady passed her smiling, and as she passed said, "Good afternoon, Doris. Doris started to laugh. Good. I'd say it was a bloody marvelous one, Mrs. Willems. Chapter 49. Shelby accelerated out of the town as fast as his little Morris 8 would allow. Its wheels squealed, and the suspension groaned at the unusual exercise it was being asked to perform. Shelby risked a glance in the rear view mirror. Nothing. He relaxed and slowed a little. Another glance. A large black car was coming into view. Shelby imitated a squeak of panic and stamped on the accelerator. His car sluggishly tried to execute the order it had been given. He hurtled on, but each time he looked, the black car had gained on him. Panic flooded through him. He realized he was rocking back and forth in his seat as if that somehow would speed the car up. On turning a corner, a set of roadworks could be seen about 200 yards further up the road. A man held a lollipop sign instructing any approaching motor vehicle to stop to allow oncoming traffic to pass. Shelby looked in the mirror. The black car was now very close. He then looked at the old feller holding the stop sign. You got no fucking chance, he thought as he shot past the stop sign at speed, straight into the path of an oncoming lorry. Shelby wrenched at the wheel, sending his car down one side of the truck into a narrowing piece of road between the lorry and the equipment used in the roadworks. The Morris 8 scraped up the side of the lorry, just missing another fellow who held the matching start-stop sign at the other end of the roadworks. He saved himself from serious damage by flinging himself into a trench as Shelby hurtled by. The large black car thought better about jumping the stop sign and waited for the lorry to pass before resuming the chase. Shelby had gained himself a couple of minutes, but realized he had to hide as he'd never outraced the black car. He then realized he was coming up to the old disused windmill and tanning pits. He again wrenched at the wheel, and the car slewed sideways and somehow made the turn. He carried on up the bumpy dirt track lane to the collection of old buildings. Mr. Joshua, sitting in the passenger seat, tapped Mr. Tree's arm to get his attention. Pointing across the field to the disused buildings, just as Shelby disappeared around a corner. Mr. Tree gently came to a stop, then reversed and drove back to the junction to the old windmill. He then turned up the lane and unrushed drove on. Shelby pulled up out of sight of the road, turned the engine off and got out. Then went to peer around the corner, only to see the black car driving sedately up the lane towards him. Shelby squeaked in panic and ran into the collection of old buildings to hide. Mr. Joshua and Mr. Tree stood next to the abandoned Morris 8. It appears, Mr. Tree, that our quarry had gone to ground. Indeed, Mr. Joshua. It seems to me we have two choices, Mr. Tree. Wait for the quarry to come out of hiding, or we go in and flush him out. Both men looked at the numerous crumbling outhouses that surrounded the old windmill. Mr. Joshua, the suit I'm wearing was made in Savile Row, as I'm sure was yours. Hardly suitable attire to be rummaging in such places, don't you think? I agree, Mr. Tree. I suggest we retire to a suitable vantage point and wait. The car? Mr. Joshua, should we disable it, do you think? I think not, Mr. Tree. Should we do such a thing, our quarry may well decide to leave on foot and may well evade our attention. Yes, Mr. Joshua, I agree. I think we retire to the main road and wait. Mr. Tree turned the car around and drove back down the track. On reaching the main road, turned right, pulling up in a lay-by that offered a view of the track leading to the windmill. Both men sat in silence watching the track. Shelby watched them drive away and sighed with relief. Realizing that it may well be a trap, he decided to find a vantage point to view the track and main road. He crossed over to the windmill and made his way up the dusty cobweb-ridden circular stairs. Each step was accompanied with frighteningly creaking floorboards and rickety handrails. Nearing the top level, he looked out across to the road. The light was fading fast, but he could just make out the shape of a car in a lay-by. We have a standoff, then, do we? Well, two can play that game, he thought. Shelby sat down to wait. Chapter 50. Rosie sounded her car's horn outside Alf's house, Within seconds, Alf walked out as if he'd been waiting just inside the door. He carried a large bag and 3 broom handle-like poles wrapped in a black sheet. As he got halfway down the path, Mavis ran out after him, throwing her arms around him, smothering him with kisses. They exchanged a few words, then Alf carried on to the car. Placing his bags on the back seats, he shut the door. Rosie drove off while Mavis waved manically on the doorstep. What was all that about? Oh, nothing, just Mavis worrying about tonight. She's not the only one. You'll be fine, girl. You got your clothes in the bag in the back. As they traveled toward the hall, Alf leant over into the back seat. Opening his bag, he took out a Bible, a pair of pebble glasses, and a vicar's dog collar. Putting the dog collar and glasses on, he clutched the Bible to his chest, then turned to Rosie. What do you think then? He asked. Very pious, Alf. Well, here starteth the first lesson. Reaching Plumley Hall, they turned onto the drive, then up to the gatehouse with its army checkpoint. A bored soldier approached the car. Can I help you, Vicar? He asked. Indeed you may, young man. I'm the Reverend Wilberforce Fox. We have an appointment with Mr. and Mrs. Pringle, in regards to the town's winter bring and buy sale. The soldier leant down, looking over at Rosie. And you are Miss? Me? Yes, Miss, you. The Reverend can't drive, so I was asked to help. No, your name, Miss? Oh, yes, sorry, Gina Gregory. Thank you, Miss. Returning to the guard post, the soldier called the kitchen field telephone. Mrs. Pringle, we have a Reverend Fox and a Miss Gregory at the gate. They say they are expected. Fine, I'll send them straight up. He then lifted the barrier and waved Rosie and Alf through. As he lowered the barrier, a motorbike combination turned up the drive. He looked at the sidecar with its large gas painted on its side. Then the rider with his tin helmet, also with gas stenciled on it. Let me guess, you've come to read the meter. Nope, Sergeant, there's been a report of a gas leak at the hall. Corporal. The soldier corrected him, touching his 2 stripes on his arm to make his point. Keep your nose clean and you'll make it. Oh, a smartass are we? No. I'm sorry, Corporal, it's been a long day. Well, just watch your step, mate. Yes, sorry, Hengist said. I take it they are expecting you then. Yes, Corporal. Oh, go on up then. I take it you know where you going. Yes, thank you, Corporal. The barrier was raised, and Hengist followed Rosie and Alf up the drive. Hengist pulled up behind Rosie's car. Alf retrieved his bag from the back seat, as did Rosie. They were all soon safe in the kitchen. Pringle and Mabel were busy preparing food. On seeing Hengist, Mabel said, Hengist? Oh God, we have a problem. What is it, Mabel, my love? Lady Tavistock is here. She arrived earlier today. She's up in Sir Tarquin's room at this very moment. That was quick. Hengist muttered. What was that, Hengist? Just saying that does pose a problem, but they are in the West Wing. And we'll be in the East Wing, so we should be okay. Alf interrupted them. Sorry, but I need to get going. Where can I change? In there? Pringle said, pointing to the walk-in larder. Alf went into the larder. And Hengist? We found what he's been up to with the estate funds. He's creamed off, as you put it, over £300. I'm not surprised, but we have more pressing problems at the moment. Time's getting on and I have to be in my position soon. We did think, when we take dinner up to their room at 7:30, taking the accounts at the same time would be an excuse to be there until 8. That sounds like a great idea. But what if they decide to confront Ronald Plumley there and then, going off to the East Wing? We'll worry about that, if and when it happens. Because if things go plan, we'll be gone by 8 and in the pub by 9. The larder door opened, and Alf returned to the kitchen dressed all in black. Picking up his black holdall, and the 4 poles rolled in a black sheet. He made to leave. Stopping in the doorway, he looked over to Hengist. It's just like old times. Then he pulled a black balaclava down over his face and left the kitchen. Mabel watched Alf leave, her mouth agape. If you do your bit, it'll all be fine, my love. Hengist reassured Mabel. Mabel sighed. Okay, Hengist, it's your show, we'll do our bit as best we can. Great, I must get to the storeroom. I take it he's in the bath? Yes, I heard him go in about 10 minutes ago. Pringle confirmed. Right, I'll be off. Rosie, you okay? Yes, fine, I know what I'm doing. Well, people, Hengist said, it's showtime. Then he too left the room, making his way stealthily to the storeroom next to the study. Chapter 51. Alf turning left out of the kitchen and made his way toward the headland and the beach. He darted from shadow to shadow cast by buildings, trees, and bushes, pausing on one occasion under a large bush, as two armed sentries doing their rounds passed within 20 feet of him. But soon he was far enough away from the hall and its occupants to breathe easier. The darkness was reassuring for his concealment, but made progress difficult and downright dangerous. On reaching the end of the headland, he looked over and down to the beach. Or more correctly, he looked down to where he knew the beach to be. The low clouds and the lack of moonlight made it like he was looking into infinity. Alf tried to locate the path he'd been told to look out for, that would lead him to the beach. He was just starting to think he would never find it, when he watched as a fox pushed through some bushes and disappeared. Alf followed the fox through the gorse, and on to what was indeed a path of sorts. 15 minutes later, Alf felt softness under his feet, and the closeness of the sound of the waves gently lapping onto the sand informed him he was on the beach. He then started walking along the beach, away from Wallop-on-Sea. Chapter 52. Rosie sat at the table biding her time. She had watched Alf leave off into the darkness to complete his part of the plan. Followed shortly thereafter by Hengist on his way to the storeroom. Just getting changed, Mabel. As Hengist left the room, Rosie picked up her bag and walked into the larder. Okay, love, Mabel said as she busied herself preparing the trays of food for Sir Tarquin and Lady Tavistock. 5 minutes later, Rosie re-entered the kitchen, her attire for the evening discreetly hidden by the trench coat she had tightly tied around her voluptuous figure. She placed the bag that held her normal clothes into the larder, and sat down and waited. It was soon time to go. Best I get going then, Rosie said, getting to her feet. Us too, Mabel, are you ready? Pringle said. Yes, darling, you got the account books? Well, best of luck, Rosie, Mabel said as she walked off. And you both, came the reply. Mabel and Pringle, trays and account ledgers in hand, went off into the west wing. Rosie walked out to her car. Chapter 53. Mr. Joshua turned to Mr. Tree. Time to leave, I think, Mr. Tree. Indeed, Mr. Joshua. Start the car up, turn on the lights and drive off if you would be so good. Mr. Tree did as requested. Shelby, watching from his vantage point, saw the lights come on and the car driving off. Waiting a further 10 minutes, he consulted his watch. Thinking it was now time to make his move. He made his way through the darkness, down and out of the windmill. On reaching his car, he fired up the engine but not the lights. Then he gingerly drove down the track to the road, watching intently for the return of the black car. On reaching the road, he turned lights on. There in the beam was Mr. Joshua and Mr. Tree standing next to the black car. I think the quarry has been flushed, Mr. Tree. I believe so, Mr. Joshua. They then rushed toward Shelby. Shelby screamed and stamped on the accelerator. The Morris 8 shot forward, forcing Mr. Joshua and Mr. Tree to leap aside and watch as the car sped off down the road. Mr. Tree, will you please catch that car? Certainly, Mr. Yeshua, it'll be a pleasure. They sped off in pursuit again. Shelby panicking and driving like a maniac. Ronald can help me. He started towards the hall. They sped on. The black car trying to overtake and force Shelby to stop. Shelby, for his part, screaming at the top of his voice, swerved and skidded to stay in front. Chapter 54. Rosie started up her car and painfully slowly drove the 100 yards around the side of the west wing, then along the front of the hall, under the stone arch towards the stables, pulling up next to Ronald Plumley's Rolls-Royce. She got out of her car, adjusted her coat, and walked up the steps and knocked on the French windows. Ronald Plumley opened the door with a grin. "My dear lady, welcome. Thank you for coming and standing in for Margaret at such short notice." "My pleasure, Ronald." "A drink, my dear?" Ronald asked. "Please, do you have a brandy?" "Of course, old girl. Your money is on the mantelpiece, dear lady," he said. Rosie picked up the white envelope off the mantelpiece and placed in the coat pocket. "May I take your coat?" he added. Rosie swallowed. She took her coat off and handed it to Plumley, revealing as she did so her voluptuous curves in a very tight and very short red leather skirt and matching bra. "And what color knickers do you have on this evening, if I may be so bold to ask, dear lady?" Rosie gave him a sultry smile, raised her skirt corner and said, "What knickers, Ronald?" "Oh, I approve, dear lady, I do so approve." "And you, Ronald, you have chosen to wear this evening?" Plumley removed his robe with a flourish to show off the blue and white frilly dress he was wearing. Rosie thought the dress looked familiar, but couldn't place it. Only when Plumley put on the matching hairband did the penny drop. Rosie clasped her hands together in mock glee. "Ah, my dearest Alice, so nice to make your acquaintance at last." Plumley curtsied in acknowledgement. Hengist watched from the storeroom ventilator, the DeVry lunchbox whirring away, recording the activities taking place in the room. Hengist couldn't work out if he was more shocked watching the man he started to see as his arch-enemy dancing around the room dressed as Alice in Wonderland, or one of his best friends wearing nothing but a small amount of red leather, her fat wiggling as she clapped her hands as she encouraged Alice in her dance. Hengist continued watching. "It's like driving past a car crash," he thought. "You know you shouldn't look, B, you can't help yourself." Rosie stopped clapping and pushed Plumley into a chair. "Well, Miss Alice, I have been instructed by the vicious Queen of Hearts to punish you for picking the red roses in the garden, and have brought something with me to do just that." Rosie opened her bag and took out several lengths of rope and 2 pairs of handcuffs. Ronald fell into character, holding his hand to his mouth in fake shock. "Please, mistress, no." "Quiet now, Alice, my dear," Rosie scolded Alice, wagging her finger as she talked. She then proceeded to handcuff Ronald's wrists behind his back, then lifted his feet up onto a stool, and using the rope tied his ankles to its legs. This was done with a speed and proficiency Hengist found slightly concerning. Rosie relaxed a bit, now she knew Ronald was incapacitated. She bent over and removed Plumley's high heels and white socks, went back to her bag retrieving 2 large feathers. Then, a vicious grin on her face, proceeded to rub the feathers up and down the soles of Plumley's feet. He writhed and twisted in his seat, almost screaming. "No. No. Please, no." Chapter 55. Pringle and Mabel, on leaving the kitchen, made their way to the west wing. Mabel carrying a tray holding all the crockery and cutlery required to serve dinner. Pringle carried the wine glasses and the accounts ledgers. "Okay, darling, you set the table, and I'll pour the wine, then I speak to Sir Tarquin about the accounts while you nip to the kitchen to fetch the food." "Yes, dear," Mabel agreed. Reaching the door, they paused, then knocked twice. Lady Tavistock opened the door. "Oh, lovely dinner. I'm famished, please come in." Mabel walked over to the small table in the bay window, placed the crockery down on the table, and started to lay 2 places for dinner. Pringle placed his tray on a sideboard. "Shall I pour, m'lady?" he asked. "Please do, Pringle." As Pringle poured the wine, Sir Tarquin walked in from the adjacent dressing room. Pringle stopped pouring the wine. Sir Tarquin had seemingly grown 5 inches, his hair now short and tight. He also sported a bushy, well-trimmed mustache, while the rest of his face was now closely shaved. "Do I pass muster then, Jennifer, my love?" Sir Tarquin asked as he stood to attention. He wore his full-dress uniform, crisp and spotless, scarlet in color and with the insignia that proclaimed the wearer to be a colonel in the Horse Guards Regiment. "What do you think, Mabel, does he pass muster?" Lady Tavistock asked. Mavis, a tear in her eye, turned to Lady Tavistock. "Yes, milady, I think he's scrubbed up well. And if I remember correctly, you were very partial to Sir Tarquin wearing that particular uniform." "Indeed, I still am, Mabel." The women shared a smile and a knowing look. Pringle handed Lady Tavistock a glass of wine, then poured one for Sir Tarquin. "Sir, may I draw your attention to something that I feel your lordship should know as a matter of urgency?" Pringle said as he handed Sir Tarquin his drink. "Of course, Pringle, what is it?" "Well, sir, I have been made aware that some person has been defrauding the Plumley estate of a substantial amount of money. Ronald is dealing with the estate these days. Pringle just inform him tomorrow there's a good man." "Ronald? That insect is now running the estate," Lady Tavistock exclaimed. "Well, yes. He has done so since his return from South Africa, my dear," Sir Tarquin said. "You mean he's actually living here?" Sir Tarquin looked at the floor and said nothing, so Lady Tavistock turned to Mabel. "Mabel?" "Yes, milady, he's basically taken over the East Wing," Mabel answered with glee. "What were you thinking, Tarquin? You know what he's like." Pringle interrupted. "I would have of course have informed Mr. Ronald under normal circumstances, but—" "Yes, Pringle," Sir Tarquin prompted. "It's Mr. Ronald who is doing it, the embezzling, I mean. See, Tarquin. A leopard can't change his spots. That man is an unmitigated ass." "I know, dear, but he's family. What can I do?" "Well, I'm not family yet. Pringle, what have you got to show us?" "If your lordship would take a look at these ledgers." Mabel left to bring up the food while Pringle showed the ledgers to Lady Tavistock and Sir Tarquin. On Mabel's return, Sir Tarquin was pacing angrily around the room. Lady Tavistock was still looking at the ledgers. "Something has to be done, Tarquin. When we're married, he'll have to go anyway. I couldn't live under the same roof as Ronald." "Indeed, my love, the man has to go. But how to avoid a scandal?" Sir Tarquin agreed. "Bugger a scandal. Shoot him if you like, Tarquin, but he's got to go." Chapter 56. Alf had walked over a mile away from the hall along the beach. He stopped, opened the holdall, and removed a mallet. Unrolling the poles and sheet, he proceeded to make a large windbreak by knocking the poles into the sand and then attaching the sheet. When this was done, he examined his work. That should hide him from anyone looking his way from atop the headland or the hall, he thought. He then got on with the rest of his task. He next assembled the first paper pouch, attaching a small wicker basket stuffed with twigs and paper to its wooden frame. When completed, Alf placed a stone on top of it to prevent it blowing away. Not that it was necessary. Alf considered the evening was as still as the grave. But better safe than sorry. He then started on the second pouch. Soon he had all 20 completed and ready to go. Alf checked his watch. 2 more minutes to wait. He'd cut it fine, but he'd made it. The 2 minutes up. He picked the top assembled paper pouch off the pile. Fluffed it open. He then took a lighter out of his pocket and lit the twigs and rags in its attached wicker basket. He then held the lantern up as it filled with the hot air. Soon it started to rise of its own accord. Alf gently released it, and the first paper lantern slowly rose into the air. Alf quickly started on the second one. He made good time. Within 6 minutes, all 20 lanterns were majestically soaring through the ink-black sky, traveling slowly down the coast on the prevailing breeze, appearing both beautiful and sinister at the same time, as they passed through different layers of cloud. Alf watched the fruits of his labor for a minute, then packed up and started his way back through the blackness. Chapter 57. The two privates manning the observation post on top of the hall's tower lit their third fag of the hour. What I don't get, see, is why we're up here at all, isn't it, boyo? I mean, it's as dark as a Rhonda pit out here, isn't it? I can't even see the mess tent, can I, boyo? So what's the bloody point? That's the army for you, Di. You should be used to it by now, said Harry. Do you know, boyo? I'd give a week's pay for a bowl of my mam's call, now isn't it? Good cook than your mum, Di? Oh no, boyo, fucking terrible as a rule, but her call is wonderful. Any tea left in that flask, Di, my old mucker? No, boyo, it full of emptiness, isn't it, see? Both men drew heavily on their fags, while staring into the blackness before them. Di, have you seen that white sports car parked out the front? What was that? What, boyo? A strange light out there, Harry said. Where? It's gone now. No. There it is again. A glowing light in the clouds, there, look, Harry urgently pointed into the inky blackness. I can't see jack shish. Yes, I saw it. There's another one, Di. And another, Harry exclaimed. Di picked up the phone. It's the tower OP here, isn't it? We have several strange orange light visuals to the east. There are more of them, Di. Di looked back. There's loads of them, you look, see. Can you identify the type of aircraft? The command post asked. They aren't planes, they just little glowing lights, boyo. What height is speed? I'm fucked if I know, isn't it? Very slow, east to west at maybe 8,000 feet. It could be a German secret weapon or something, isn't it? Di said. The order came sharp and concise down the line. Sound the alarm. Di shouted to his mate. Sound the alarm, Harry. Harry firmly grasped the handle of the air raid siren and started to wind it up. The siren started low and slow but increased and increased to a deafening howl. Chapter 58. What on earth is that noise? Lady Tavistock asked of no one in particular. It's the air raid warning, milady, Mabel said. What on earth are we expected to do now? May I suggest it might be wise to retire to the wine cellar, Sir Tarquin? You must do what you see fit, old boy, but I for one am not spending the evening in a cellar. I totally agree with you, my darling, Lady Tavistock said, then added, Mabel, if you would be so kind to serve dinner, then feel free to retire with Pringle to the cellar. Mabel just stood there staring into space, frozen to the spot. Not receiving a reply, Lady Tavistock spoke again. Mabel, are you all right? Mabel just uttered the word. Married. Lady Tavistock put a motherly arm around the housekeeper's shoulder. Yes, dear, it's been a long time coming, but we getting married as soon as possible. Now dish up that delicious-smelling pie, and get off with Pringle to the cellar. M'lady, I'll stay here if that suits your ladyship, Mabel said, smiling, and as a tear of joy rolled down her cheek. Capital, my girl, capital. Then please dish up the food. Pringle, another glass if you'd be so kind, Sir Tarquin said. Lady Tavistock took her seat. Mabel served the food while on the tower roof the howling siren reached its crescendo. Chapter 59. Rosie took her cue as the siren started, stopping her work with the feather and opening the storeroom door to let the still filming Hengist in. On seeing Hengist enter the room, Plumley's writhing and twisting increased to a level one would imagine he was being electrocuted. Let me up. Get these things off me. Who are you? Do you know who I am? Hengist stopped filming. Don't you recognize me, Ronald? Plumley stopped struggling and looked at Hengist. Ah, yes. I do now. Sorry we didn't stop to help you when we met last. Time was pressing, as you can imagine, old boy. Now if you would kindly remove my bonds, we can discuss this like adults. Rosie had retrieved the camera from her bag and started taking photos. Stop that immediately, woman. Don't fret, Ronald, it's only insurance, Hengist said. Insurance? Never mind that for a minute. Now you have something of mine I want back. Well, 26 things to be more correct, so may I have them, please? What, those coins? They were worthless old fruit. If they are indeed worthless, you won't mind giving them back, will you? I would, old man, but I sold them, you know how it is. But I'll willingly give you the £2 20 shillings I got for them, if that helps. You've sold one to a dealer in Frambourne, and it fetched £45. The rest you keep in a small red box. But not in your green safe, hidden in there. We've looked. Hengist pointed to the closed doors of the dresser. You've looked? Yes, we've looked. But never mind, I think I know where they are anyway. Do you now then, old boy? Plumley said smugly. Yes, I think I do, old boy. Do you know, Ronald, you have a very telling habit. I should try and eradicate it if I were you. Every time I mention those coins, you will keep looking at this fireplace. Hengist walked to the fireplace. Am I getting warm, Ronald? Ronald said nothing, just gritted his teeth. Now I came across a fireplace once with a hidden compartment. Could this be one of those, I wonder? Hengist made a show of pressing and turning parts of the fireplace for a minute, then grasped the left-hand acorn which moved as he turned it. What have we here then? Again Plumley said nothing, he just glowered at Hengist as he turned the opposite acorn. What next, I wonder? Hengist smiled. Thank you, Ronald. You should really take more care what and where you look. Ronald snapped his gaze to the floor. Hengist pressed the rosette, and the secret compartment clicked out. Plumley watched with shock and panic as Hengist lifted the little red box out, and lightly shook it so the jingle of coin could be heard. This is the box we're looking for. How do you know all this? Plumley said, now more than slightly concerned. We just know things. Like we know you've been embezzling money from the Plumley estate. How on earth could you know about that? Hengist turned his palms upward as if to say. 'Cause I'm me? Well, that concludes our business, I think, Hengist said, placing the box into his pocket. Ah yes, I almost forgot. Should you bother me again over these items? The film and photos we've taken today will be sent to the Sunday papers. Mind you, I think last week's visit with Shelby and Lisa was much more entertaining than today's still. Also, I think the police maybe be also interested in your accounting of the Plumley estate. All things considered, it might be in your interest to take a holiday somewhere a long way away. Why should I do that then? Plumley smugly asked. Because Sir Tarquin, I believe, has been informed of your creative accounting this evening. That's no problem, my brother is a broken reed, he does what I tell him. Maybe you should check that with Lady Tavistock. What's it got to do with her? Plumley asked, unable to keep the panic out of his voice. Chapter 60. Outside things were happening. I'll notify Captain Fanshawe immediately. What? Di shouted into the field telephone, as he tried to be heard over the air raid siren. I'll notify, never mind, said the duty signaller. Crashing the telephone handset back into its cradle, and running out to find Captain Fanshawe. Almost crashing into him, coming out of the command truck in his haste. What's the alarm? Captain Fanshawe asked. Strange light sighted, approaching us from the east, sir. Friendlies? None reported in the area, sir. Fanshawe looked around. The only thing he could see was shadowy figures running around shouting to each other, trying to be heard over the siren. Get me Rye on the phone, private. Yes, sir. Both men ran back to the radio truck. The signaller picked up the field telephone and hastily turned the winding handle on its side. Waiting for the click that signaled the call had been answered. Handed the handset to Fanshawe. Rye? It's Fanshawe. If this is another false alarm, old boy, the colonel will have your bollocks for breakfast. We have strange, unidentified lights approaching us from a seaward direction. What? The radio operator tapped Captain Fanshawe on the shoulder to get his attention. I think you should come and see this, sir. Rye, stay on the line, I'll be back in a moment. Fanshawe dashed outside and found the whole command section looking seaward to a section of coast where the black clouds were shimmering with orange shadows, and the sky itself was emanating an orange glow, while numerous glowing orbs moved randomly through this miasma. What the fuck? Dashing back into the command tent, snatched up the phone. Rye? Here, Fanshawe, we see them too now. No friendlies reported in the area? No, none that we know of, old boy. I'm going to engage. Can anyone join the party, old boy? Follow my lead then, Rye. Will do. Fanshawe depressed the cradle switch on the field telephone, switched the channel, wound the handle. Gun 1 standby, gun 2 standby. Fanshawe carried the telephone out of the tent. The orange glow was even more dramatic. Engage enemy on my command. Fire. Chapter 61. The meal was dished up, but as Lady Tavistock raised her fork to her mouth, the windows rattled at the loud thump. Thump came from outside, along with flashes of lights that could be seen through the curtains. No need to panic, my dear, it's our boys doing the firing, Sir Tarquin explained. Tarquin, when have I ever panicked? There was that time when the vicar almost caught us in the fortune-teller's tent at the village fete, as I recall. Tarquin. Both laughed and carried on with the meal as the thump-thump continued outside.